Our topic is on decomposing the effects of advertising. I'm Gerard Tellis. My co-author, Rajesh Chandy, is here. And our other co-authors, Debbie and Pattana, could not attend. We are going to divide our presentation into the problem and solution, the results of our model, and the testimonial about how it worked. I'll do the problem and solution. And I'd like to start off by presenting an ad.
Look for a dentist in the phone book, and you might get halfway through the countless pages of dentists by lunch. Or call 1-800-DENTIST, and you can see a dentist at lunch. The choice is yours. Flipping through page after page, picking a random name you know nothing about from the phone book, or calling 1-800-DENTIST, having all your questions answered, and being individually matched to a pre-screened dentist in your area. I know who I'd call. 1-800-DENTIST. We wrote the book on how to find a dentist.
So this ad is one of a bank of 72 ads which were produced by the brand name 1-800-DENTIST, which actually belongs to a company called Futuredontics. Futuredontics grew out of the current problem in our cities, namely of high mobility, both of consumers and dentists, so that consumers do not know which dentist is right for them. What Futuredontics does, and they started about 15 years ago, what it does is it advertises the 1-800-DENTIST brand name, as you saw in this ad. When consumers call this number, the company interviews them, finds out their profile, and then matches them to a dentist whom they would be comfortable with and enjoy. If this consumer then calls up the dentist, that is called a referral. The company records the referrals by hour. It was very successful. It started in Los Angeles. It was very successful. And in about 10 years, it expanded to 60 cities in the US. In the course of this expansion, it developed a bank of 72 ads. But the company did not know which of these ads worked, when, where, in which city or which channel, how long it was effective versus how long they ran it, or why it was effective. And so they came to us with this problem of they were randomly picking out ads and using them in different cities, sometimes on intuition, sometimes just by luck of a draw. We decided to help them look for a solution. And when we looked into the literature, we saw two streams of research. There is a very extensive and rich stream of research, of behavioral research, which looks at what aspects of the creative or the content of the ad are most effective. Most of these studies are done in experiments, and the dependent variables they look at are internal to the consumer, mental processes such as attitudes, intent to buy, and so on. The independent variables are various characteristics of the ad content, such as cues or image or copy, aspects which you saw in the first ad. There's another stream of research, econometric research, which looks at the effects of advertising intensity, that is either dollars or GRPs, gross rating points, on sales in field settings. There's been almost no effort to join these two streams of research, even though firms spend billions of dollars in advertising. And really what firms are looking for, where they put their money, is in the details. Which particular ad works, when, where, how long, and why. So even though a company may have $1 million or $60 million, and even though the advertising may or may not work, what is critical is, does it work for the particular ad they're using? Maybe it doesn't work, but if they switch the ad, it might use. Or if they switched minor aspects of the ad, it might still work. And so the money is in the details, but in the literature, there is no real emphasis on these details. We have two very rich streams, the econometric stream, which looks at very rigorously how advertising in general, in aggregate, is effective in markets in real settings. And then we have this very rich behavioral stream, which looks at all of the aspects of advertising, how it is effective in experimental situations. And what we are trying to do is bridge these two streams so we can get very good results and enrich the field. The academic contribution here is a linking of the behavioral and econometric approaches using historical data. So we don't have to run experiments. But we can do all of the rich studies that were done in experimental settings now in the field. The results and the studies have been published in 2 papers in the Journal of Marketing Research. So here we will not emphasize all of the hypotheses, but we will emphasize more of the practical or managerial contribution. The framework and model that we develop can track the effectiveness of advertising on response in terms of specificity, which particular ad works, in terms of carryover, how long does this effect last, in terms of timing, at which hour should I schedule my ad, in terms of frequency, how many exposures per hour, in terms of the media buy, on which particular TV channel I should screen the ad, in terms of the creative, what appeal, what message, what cues, an expert, a non-expert endorser, what image should I use, in which market should I screen a particular ad, for how long should I screen it, 1 week or 3 weeks, is there a wear-in, is there a wear-out, and in terms of returns, how profitable is each particular ad. Now you might say to answer all these questions, you would need formidable data. And actually, our data, our needs are extensive, but not overbearing. We're really based on historical data. What we need is temporarily disaggregate data, that is in hours or minutes. And single source data now has recordings of TV ads in seconds. Actually, it's had that from the mid-1980s. And on the internet, you get such data very easily. The response can be calls, click-throughs, as in the internet, calls, as in our case, choices, as in scanner data, or sales. And the advertising characteristics we need information are the ads, the frequency, duration, media placement, the market, the cost, and the payoff, and the copy rating. Most of these records are generally available, but not readily available to firms. So when the firm advertises, it makes a contract with the media company, and it gets a sheet of paper, either physical or electronic, about what particular placement the ad got. Oftentimes, these are collected and they are dumped somewhere in the storeroom. And so all you need to do is get those sheets out and transfer those into an electronic form into a database, which then can be analyzed. All of these items of the ads which I listed here are useful, but they are not all necessary. So if I don't have 1 or 2 of them, I can still use the model and answer questions on the other. So the aspects which we are analyzing are additive in the sense that we get the effects of each separately. Now, I also said that we needed the creative of the ad. And Futuredontics, like many companies, used a vast variety of ads, which it kept developing over time and keeping the old ones also. The ads differed substantially in creative, and in the interest of time, we couldn't show you how differently. You had that one particular person appearing and encouraging consumers, but you had doctors, you had fear appeals, you had warmth appeals, and so a variety of appeals. And what we did is we developed an 80-item instrument using research from consumer behavior. And then we got 2 independent research assistants. We trained them and we paid them, and they rated all of these 72 ads on this instrument. The interquarter agreement is 76%, and this instrument is pretty comprehensive, so it can be used in other places. We are using just 3 or 4 aspects of the content which we found to be important. And to analyze our effects of advertising, we use a 2-stage hierarchical model. In the first stage, we estimate the effectiveness of individual ads. And in the second stage, we take the effectiveness from the individual ads, which might vary, and we relate them to characteristics of these ads. So in algebraic form, the first stage model is presented as the equation here. And it looks complex, but it's so because we have a variety of variables. All of them are recorded by the hour. They are in matrix notation, and a number of them have lags. But basically, we have the referrals, or like sales, as a dependent variable, lag referrals as an independent variable. We have multiple lags, so you can get a non-monotonic decay. It doesn't have to always decay at the same rate. We have advertising. We have media placement in TV stations. We have the individual ads, the names of the ads, the hour of the day, and the day of the week. And the last 4 are dummy variables. And in this first stage equation, the critical variable here, C, is the creative, and beta C is the effect of that. And we take that, and then we use it in a second stage model on the various aspects of the ad. And this is the algebraic form. The aspects that were particularly important in this study are the appeal, whether it was an emotional or an argument appeal, the frame, whether it was negative, stressing the benefits of not using the service versus the positive, the prominence of the message, whether or not they used the expert, the interactions of these with the age of the market. As I said, there were 60 markets of differing age, and the main effect of market age. And Rajesh will tell you about the results.
Thanks, Jerry. So I'm going to walk through a series of results that get at the questions we'd raised earlier: which ad works, when, where, how often, and for how long. And I'm going to start with a description of the baseline. So this is the baseline set of referrals over the time of day and by day of week. So each of these lines here represents a day. So the first line there is Monday. The second is Saturday at the very bottom, and Friday just above, and finally each of the other days. What you see there, what the company found then, is that there is a reduction in effectiveness, or reduction in the baseline level of sales over a day of week, as well as an inverted U-shaped type response between over the time of day. Similar results across other markets. The earlier one I showed you was Chicago. Here's Sacramento. Similar results in Miami. Similar results in Minneapolis and Washington, D.C. Similar but not identical. The next set of results I'm going to show you have to do with the carryover effects of advertising. So if you show an ad, how long does the effect of advertising last is the question here. And this is of keen interest to the company. Here's a result from one of our markets, Sacramento. What you notice is that in the period of airing of the ad, you have high effectiveness, followed by a decay, followed by a bump, and then most of the effects disappear within about 8 hours. And there's this odd bump which we explored in greater detail as we looked into this, and we discovered that in fact the bump is due to two separate effects happening that combine together. The morning ads actually take a while to kick in, whereas the daytime ads happen immediately. And we find similar patterns across our other markets. Again, similar but not identical. Here's Chicago, Miami, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Washington, D.C., and so on. Speaking of decay, again, how long does advertising work? Here are some results on ad wear-in and wear-out. It appears that as age of the advertising goes up, the effectiveness seems to go down. Again, referrals, sales that is of keen interest to them is the variable on the left hand, on the y-axis. This is the effect of repetition, frequency of advertising on referrals. Again, an inverted U-shape kind of response on frequency. An issue that was of keen interest to the firm is which particular stations work best. And the null would be that, let's say NBC or ABC works well, it should work well in all of the markets. In fact, that's not the case. Let me give you an example. Here's WB, the WB network in Chicago and Miami. What you notice from the positive signs there is every time each ad is shown, the cumulative effects is about two referrals in Chicago and about half a referral in Miami. It's actually pretty decent relative to other stations. But you also notice that in other markets, Sacramento, for example, and Washington, D.C., the WB is actually quite ineffective. So you can't use that rule of thumb that WB, let's say, is an effective station, and therefore we'll continue to use that. Another analysis we did is of creative profitability. So each ad, like the one we showed earlier, can be analyzed in terms of its effectiveness. And because we know the costs and the revenues from it, we can analyze profitability. And some key numbers here. For example, in Sacramento, the most profitable creative brought the firm $615 every time it was aired, whereas the least profitable creative, relative to the average, actually was $260 less than the average creative. Let me show you a video that shows how the firm used these insights to make actual decisions and the financial impact that the firm had. This video shows Debbie MacInnis, who's our co-author, interviewing Michael Apstein, who is CEO of Futuredontics, the company that runs 1-800-Dentist, and currently CEO of 1-800-Plumber.
Can you give us a sense of how much impact this model's had in terms of some of your financial decisions?
It's had tremendous impact in terms of financial decisions. It's represented a 15 to 20% savings for us on the media side of the equation. One of the most important things was we were able to determine the decay, what I think in the research calls the decay pattern.
Right.
For us, we kind of called it the life of the calls.
Okay.
And the decay pattern indicated that we were really advertising more than we needed to. We took a look at that, and in 5-week months, which I believe is 4 months out of the year, we realized we could test going off the air completely for one of those weeks. And that the decay pattern was strong enough that it shouldn't really affect our overall call volume, given we were going to pick it up again a week later. And that was tremendous savings. I mean, you know, that was just tremendous savings. I mean, several $100,000 each week that we were dark, and overall probably amounted to close to $1 million a year in savings on media.
Okay, that's great.
We then were able to look at the call patterns by day, and began to recognize that the advertising that was placed in the latter half of the week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, really didn't generate any more calls. That all of the call pattern was driven off of the beginning half of the week. We then were able to even isolate it market by market which days were more important, and ultimately we began buying markets either on a Sunday, Monday, Tuesday pattern or a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday pattern, depending upon the market. Markets varied slightly.
Right.
And although wasn't directly a 50% savings, because some of the dollars that had been positioned later in the week were moved into the early part of the week, I'm going to estimate that it was probably about 30-35% savings on media expenditures.
Wow.
So substantial savings again.
And
really
that's on
that
top of the amount that you had talked about previously.
On top of the amount previously. So I'd say, you know, that might have been another 7-figure amount.
Okay.
And a third area it had application was in creative.
The second thing we did is look at the actual content of creative. So which ads work and why do these ads work? And in order to do that, we also recognized that some creatives, the very same creatives, seem to be having rather dramatically different effects for some markets relative to others. And in looking at the data, it appeared that some creatives seem to be systematically more effective in young markets, and others more effective in older markets. And let me explain what young versus old markets mean. The company had been in business at this point in LA, their earliest market, for about 14 years. So people, consumers in LA were quite familiar with this service, whereas a market like Washington, D.C. or Minneapolis was a rather new market, and consumers in this market were not as familiar with the service. The company's traditional approach to airing ads was to use the same ads across all markets. And what we found is that the very same ads were quite different in effectiveness in some markets relative to other, and we isolated that cause as being related to the age of the market. So LA is an old market, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Washington, D.C. were new markets. And we found that arguments versus emotions, argument-based ads versus emotion-based ads, had quite different effects in old versus new markets, or young versus old markets. What we find then is arguments are especially effective in the younger markets, and they're also quite effective in older markets, but emotions are especially effective in older markets. And the other factor we looked at is, one of the many factors we looked at is the prominence of the 800 number. So the number of seconds that the 800 number was visible on screen in old versus new markets. And again, in new markets, it was useful to have the 800 number visible for a longer period than in older markets. And similarly, negative versus positive frames. A negative frame would be if you do not go to the dentist, then your teeth will decay and your friends will shun you. And a positive frame would be if you go to the dentist, your friends will love you. So I'm exaggerating, but that you could think of two kinds of ways of framing the question. But negative frames are especially effective in younger markets and less effective in older markets. Let me show you what the firm did in response to these insights, because what they did is they redesigned their creative strategy.
Anyway, as creatives were identified that were dramatically more successful than other creatives, we were able to identify the elements, kind of the elements of appeal in that creative and replicate them. So we became much more effective in the production of creative. We, prior to the research, had been making typically three different creatives at a time in a series. We'd make 3 30-second spots. 2 that were kind of always tried and true, formulas that we knew worked. And the third one, typically, we'd kind of branch out and try something we hadn't tried before.
Okay.
Occasionally, that would work, and other times it was off the air a week later.
Just to summarize very quickly then, key insights from the model for the firm as well as in general. Advertising seems to decay very rapidly. There is a distinct pattern to the decay, but it happens within 8 hours. Much of the effectiveness of advertising seems to disappear. And this is in contrast to prior research that has suggested weeks, months, even years sometimes. It varies dramatically between different ads, different media, and different markets. And in fact, different ads in different markets. There is an optimal frequency in terms of repetition. The age of the creative, the older it gets, the quickly it does wear out. The creative does wear out. The creatives, even when they are effective, may not be actually profitable, and it varies dramatically between based on age of the market and the content of the ad. So what did Futuredontics do? You saw what Michael suggested. They, among other things, the pattern of calls during the day, time of day and day of week suggested to them that they could staff their call centers, their operators, in a manner that would minimize wait timing. This is generalizable to inventory and other aspects such as those as well. They made changes to the advertising schedule, over $1 million. They reduced wait in the least effective creatives and increased in the most effective creatives and channels, and designed entirely new markets to fit market age. We've also done some additional analysis that help decompose the call volume based on TV, radio, creative, NBC, and so on. We could do cost effectiveness of vehicle, cost per call relative to calls, and identify NBC seems to be the most effective here. We can split it up, again, just to give you the kinds of insights that are possible based on most effective creatives, how much they bring in dollar terms, and split the effectiveness up into its components. And really detailed information, so cost per ad, number of ads shown, and so on. Based on this, we've created a simulator that can be used to actually plan the advertising. So, for instance, this is the set of effectiveness and predicted calls over time for a particular market. The manager can use this simulator and plug in and say, well, I used to use, let's say, 5 ads at a particular time between 7 and 8 a.m. If I change this to, say, 100, and if I estimate this campaign, how does the pattern of calls vary over time? So you could do various analyses that are of interest to managers using the simulator and help predict advertising in the future. To summarize then, TV advertising is often seen as ineffective. This seems to be a common theme, some argue. I, too, will return after these messages. But we've created a model that has had its initial application at Futuredontics and has subsequently been applied to other contexts, such as 1-800-BEAUTIFY, which is a plastic surgery referral company, 1-800-PLUMBER, which is a well, obviously plumbing company, and Michael Epstein's currently CEO of 1-800-Plumber. It's also been applied to test the effectiveness of Sunday insert advertising at Best Buy Corporation, which is the largest electronics retailer in the United States. It's now the focus of a startup research venture that seeks to apply it even beyond this context. So just to summarize, and what does this model need? It needs disaggregate temporal data that many firms actually have in boxes in archives in terms of TV advertising invoices, and you code these and collect these scheduling records and rate the ads. And create a disaggregate, a comprehensive model that evaluates the effectiveness of advertising on sales and answers specific questions of great interest to managers for which answers do not currently exist in certainly very implementable, easy to implement form. Answers to questions such as which ad works, when, where, how long, and why. It's highly disaggregated advertising and analysis, and in to our knowledge, there is no model in the literature or in the field that is so disaggregated, so detailed, and so comprehensive.
One of your fascinating findings was the importance of disaggregate modeling, that you found different results for different markets and for different creative copy, and also over time, that depending on when you schedule, it was very important. And obviously what you've identified are sort of, in addition to new versus old markets, just generically how to do things better. And so now the company seems to be implementing that, which is very reassuring, and changing their copy. Do you think that now that they sort of implemented and they're going with better copy, with better schedules, that if you ran your results again today, you get different results, and maybe they could improve their carryover now that they're using sort of better matches with copy and markets?
Yeah, what happens is, what perhaps we didn't stress enough is this is not only an analytical model, but this is also a tracking model. What we realized is consumers are constantly changing. There are subtle changes in culture. They have the Y generation, the X generation, and all of these labels, as well as the types of models used change and so on. So even though the models solve the problem at one point in time, because culture is changing and because advertising is such a culturally rich medium, you need to constantly track. And the strength of this approach is that you can track without having to go to a lab. You can track in the field. And depending on which ads are working and when they are working, you can keep changing. So they probably constantly need to use the model, and they continually gain insights. And then another thing which Michael mentioned is that based on the insights of what are the content which works, they give direction to the ad agency, which then creates new ads.
And you can also apply this as the firm grows, and there is more uncharted territory, and use that data and keep recalibrating the database and the insights.
Right. Again, I want to echo Steve. I think this is great. It's been implemented, looks good. And because it looks good, you read deeper into it, so you have some questions. So one of the questions I thought I would ask you is, this deals with the wear out of the creatives. And we know, we had a presentation on Campbell earlier. If in that case, we know that there is wear out of the creative, so you have new copy, Eastlag and Rao's old studies have shown that. But there, it's the same set of people who are buying soups again and again, and they get tired of the ad. And I was wondering, why you get wear out, because is it the same people who are having toothaches again and again, or is it, because I would expect new groups of people coming in, and therefore for them this would be new copy. Why is it wearing out? So the why question was bothering me. So I want to hear your insights on that. So.
In fact, the wear out effect in this particular context are rather small, as you would expect. Our point there is also that this is a general method that can be applied to contexts where you could have wear out. So if you look at the effects here, the coefficient and the actual effect size is rather small, as you would expect. But the point generally is that it's a generalizable method that can be used to study wear out.
Okay, let me add to that too, since you asked it, that in the literature there is wear in and wear out. And there was some debate about whether there was wear in and how long it was. And what we are showing here, there's almost no wear in at all. It immediately starts wearing out. And in addition to what Rajesh mentioned, I think another thing why things are wearing out is this is the age of the creative, and I think the culture changes, and so what you thought was good and right on target in 1994 may not be that fresh and ring a bell as well in 1996. So some of it is cultural changes, even though people are not internally tired with that particular ad, it just no longer fits as well.
In fact, we could show you some ads that have, no, if not bell bottoms, close, and may not work now. They're pretty old ads.
One of the things that's really interesting about your work is that academics are often accused of not sort of knowing the specifics of the company, and although they have good general strategies and models for dealing with the generics, when you get down to the details, there's sort of implementation issues that that we forget. But in your case, you seem to know more about the details of what their ads are doing than the management did. Why do you think that they didn't learn over time, given that they had been running these things for a long time? Which ads worked in which markets?
What happened is they didn't have, this might flatter us, they didn't have a professional MBA, and they had a media analyst who had risen in the ranks. And she had this massive task of 72 ads and 60 markets. So just from a human point of view, it would be a very difficult planning job. And it was impossible to track all of these different markets to figure out what is happening because of what. Sometimes she might schedule 2 ads on 2 different channels in the same market. So just the human task, it was such a difficult problem, so much variety that was not possible to track it. And this was a relatively convenient way to do it on a large scale. Also, the data collection, while it might seem enormous here, it costs only about $10,000 or $20,000. We get paid research assistants to do it, thanks to the labor situation in our universities. So it's not, and even if you went outside, you might double that number. But the budget savings are in the millions. So sometimes I think the companies are probably too short-sighted. They're not willing to invest in the data collection in order to gain the insights that can be gained.
And related, just to elaborate on that, Jerry mentioned we had an 80-item set of attributes for each ad. So it is really complex, and it varies over time, so there are all of these interactions, some of which are not immediately obvious in an intuitive sense. And once you see it and once you bring psychological theory into it, it may become more obvious. So that's the contribution, we think.
I want to go back to this wear out again, but now a different type of wear out. This deals with wear out over time of a single ad. And you made some generalizations that, or at least claims in the paper, that other research has found it can last for months, years, and yours is, hours. And is it true of all advertising, or is it just true for direct response advertising? Because that's really what you're looking at. And I venture whether you want to go beyond that or you want to stick to that. And that follows to a more sort of general question is, what are the generalizabilities of these results to advertising in general, or would you like to just stick to direct response advertising?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and I think that's also a very critical question. And the thing you're referring to is what we call in the field carryover, rather than wear in and wear out. So if I schedule the ad at one particular hour on Monday, how long does the effect last? And we are showing an effect which lasts 8 hours. So the question is this because of the context, 800 dentists, or is it because a generalizable effect? And to answer that question, I'll make 2 points. One is a paper written by Clark in 1976, where at that time people, economists especially, were using very aggregate data in years, and they found that the effect of tobacco advertising lasted, for example, 10 years. And then later on, when they used data in quarters, they found the effect lasted in quarters. And when they used data in weeks, they found the effect lasted in weeks. So Clark put all of this together, and he came out with this very important finding, namely that the effect of advertising using distributed lag models is biased by the duration of the interval that you use. And he estimated that the most correct, or he sort of guessed or postulated that the best interval was the inter-purchase time. We actually now have a proof to show that the best data interval is the inter-exposure time. And that paper is under review at a very prestigious journal, Marketing Science. And the proof says the inter-exposure time is the time between two exposures, which in this case is hours. So if you use hours, you should get the right data interval. And so we are getting this interval, we are using the right interval, and we are finding it in hours. So it's not merely, I think, the context. But you can also reflect on your own personal lifestyle, and you find that there are tens to hundreds of ads being we are bombarded with each day, and the chances of us just remembering the ad of the previous day is difficult, leave alone a 1 week, 1 month, and so on. So it seems more likely that the effects are short. But beyond all of this, these are just the principle of generalizability. The fact is that if it's another context, maybe a car rental company or maybe Procter & Gamble, you can actually test it and see whether or not. And the effort involved is not too much.
And just to reiterate that, with respect to generalizability, most firms, many firms have this data. It's sitting in boxes somewhere in the basement of invoices from the TV stations where you actually advertise. So it can be coded. In our case, it was one full-time coder who did this for several weeks and actually converted that into electronic form. So you can test that empirically to see the exact duration of that carryover effect.